if you want to support Organized Money, go to organizedmoney.fm/subscribe. You can sign up as a paying subscriber. It helps us do the show. We really appreciate it. Thanks.
Organized Money.
We are doing an emergency episode of Organized Money.
There's a situation.
There's a
A
situation
happening.
So a guy named Zohran Mamdani just won the Democratic primary in New York City, and it has really significant impacts on anti-monopoly policy because Mamdani, as it turns out, had an anti-monopoly agenda. And I don't want to say he ran on it, but he ran. It was on corporate exploitation. He did an event with Lena Khan, who was a Federal Trade Commission chair. We've had her on the podcast, and Zephyr Teachout, also an antitrust enforcer we've had on the podcast. And she actually ran against Andrew Cuomo in 2014 for governor in the Democratic primary and did unexpectedly well. She's the first sort of person in New York politics to challenge Andrew Cuomo, who is this kind of titan and fearful guy.
Yeah.
But this is a very important race.
Yeah. Now, 11 years later, Mamdani, the big achievement he did is he beat Cuomo, who was trying this comeback after being disgraced and being thrown out of the governor's mansion for sexual harassment issues. So, yeah, it's a huge story. And we decided to call up our friend Zephyr Teachout and get her on the pod. So we're going to talk to her right now. This is Organized Money. Zephyr Teachout, welcome back to Organized Money.
Oh, you guys just keep blowing up. It's very exciting to be back.
Well, I want to know how it feels to finish a project. Maybe academia timeline of 11 years isn't too long, but you started this in 2014. You challenged Andrew Cuomo when nobody else would. And I'm just curious your thoughts 11 years later with this project you started on seemingly coming to completion.
Oh, I mean, it really was. I've been going through all the phases in not any particular order, like the phases of joy. Is that a sort of thing that you can do?
Sure.
Not just phases of grief. But I was actually really, really, really moved last night in a way that I kind of didn't expect. You're just going forward. You're doing one campaign. You're making one choice. And this feeling that this person who's really, it's not just Cuomo, but it's a whole way of politics. But Andrew Cuomo is actually, as an individual, he's just dominated New York politics for so long. And there's so much fear in New York politics because of him. We saw that with, half of his endorsements are people who previously said that he was unfit to be governor. And then we're scared that he would be back in power and would retaliate against him. I mean, it's pretty clear that's what's going on. And and just to suddenly feel this like incredible dark force of fear and big money and bullying leave, it's really, really powerful. Like the sense that the future is opening up.
Yeah.
And last night, I saw some of the women who he sexually harassed. I mean, who've been through absolute hell. Multiple times, not just with the harassment, but which was thoroughly investigated, but with his own retaliation and his current approach that nothing ever happened. So it's just a feeling like, okay, we can actually now move forward and actually build a future in New York.
Right. So can we talk about Zohran Mamdani? There were a number of candidates who actually won, and a lot of them were kind of sitting on the left populist side. You did an event with him, I guess, on June 7th, and he had an anti-monopoly platform. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. His campaign is a really great policy shop. And there were 4 specific elements of that anti-monopoly platform, but they're not the only pieces, but let's just talk about those 4. One, which I think is the easiest for people to understand, is the support of a ban on non-compete agreements, which I'm sure you guys have talked about before on this show. But it's something that we don't necessarily think about at the municipal level, but clearly can be done at the municipal level, is ban non-competes. as a city in the same way you can have, other kinds of local economic rules, and we do all the time. So he supported a ban on non-competes.
That's a big deal for Wall Street because non-competes are really big on Wall Street.
Right.
Oh, that's really interesting. Right.
That's why the statewide ban was derailed,
Yeah,
at least
yeah.
at one point, because of all of
because of the pressure
financial-
from Wall Street
Yeah.
to Hochul. Oh, so the New York Attorney General's office is, well under-resourced, really full of extraordinary lawyers, very sophisticated, ready to go, and having a full Unfair Deceptive Practices Act bill in New York. He supported
That would be a state bill, but he's
right.
in favor of it. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Third, it's that the city can really play a role intervening in these big Con Ed and utility fights. And Con Ed is a huge deal, right?
Aren't they going to trying to raise like electric utility prices by like 30% or something this year? It's like some insane. We did a show on this, and it's largely because they want shares to go up, right? It's not because they need the money. But anyway, go on.
So part of the Mamdani proposal is to fund and support these anti-monopoly challenges to the big utility companies. And I actually think that's a really big deal because, it's an area where you may not see the direct lever of power, but you have enormous platform power to treat utility raise, to really do public education in a really critical way, and then fund these challenges and help bust up a lot of the monopoly abuses that you guys have been talking about. So National Grid, Con Ed.
I went through the Con Ed recent docket. Asking
Not
these
weirdly, Matt. I know you. Yes.
Yeah. I have
weirdly
no friends.
for you.
I have
not for you, but for most
please,
people.
I want a hug. I was looking for a hug. So I went to, and there was actually a strange property tax. Like the city actually gets a lot of property taxes disguised through electric utility rate hikes. There's all this sleazy stuff. So it's like, basically people are mad at utilities, and they're not wrong to be mad, is what I learned.
Yeah, we're talking about 11 years ago. Matt was very involved in that governor's game 11 years ago, and campaign. And I think you were there when we would go to some of the PSC meetings, right? Sort of trying to use the governor's the race to highlight the fact that you actually, there's this. I mean, you guys talk about this a lot, but there is so much we could do differently in terms of utility regulation, in terms of not just blocking mergers, but real public engagement. And I was very proud of our PSC, Public Service Commission interventions.
So what you're saying is full on communism is what you're saying.
Full on commune? Yeah, no, I'm saying
communism.
Yes, yeah, right.
Sorry. But even some of the do you have another one? Go ahead.
And then the other sort of key platform was ending secret handouts in economic development. But I actually think that stands for something bigger, which is that there's been a lot of attention to some of the most disgusting aspects of Andrew Cuomo's tenure, and a lot less attention, frankly, to his economic development approach, which really was wasteful, bloated, to cronies, and a lot of it happened in secret. And what Mamdani is talking about, and I think this is so important for thinking about municipal power and real democratic power over economy, is thinking about economic power, economic development differently. And the mayor really matters for that. I think about like half of the agencies in some way or another are engaged with economic development. So
why don't we talk about the normal sleazeball stuff that Andrew Cuomo did, not the exotic stuff. Right. No, but I think economic development.
I love that we haven't mentioned Eric Adams, who's the actual mayor of the city. It's just like Andrew Cuomo. We're treating like, oh, he's the incumbent, but like,
he
don't forget it. I mean, the big money doesn't know where to go right now, and I haven't been following.
A meeting. They're having a 2:00 meeting on the Zohran situation, and I called in, but they didn't let me in. So.
They decided to fire the president of Columbia University. Yeah, they're not sure what else to do, but that's number one.
That'll start.
But when I say don't forget Eric Adams, we don't know where the big money's going to go, but it could go behind Adams. Sure. I
want to talk about a couple other things that are part of his program that maybe they're not in the anti-monopoly plank, but they do code that way.
Exactly.
The rent freeze is talking about taking on concentrated power in terms of landlords and real estate, having public grocery stores makes the large groceries in New York City pay attention to margin and pay attention to, developing themselves within food deserts and things like that, putting them out there.
So
Yeah,
I,
let's talk about each of those. I want to talk about the second one first,
Sure.
because when the video came out about Zohran's proposal for city-owned grocery stores, it's like a handful experiment with 4 or 5, I think.
Mm-hmm.
The first 20, first maybe even half of the video sounds like a just straight up anti-monopoly story. It's about the price of eggs,
Right.
the manipulation of prices, dynamic prices.
Right.
And so, understanding that he's placing this as a partial solution, a beginning, an experiment, but understanding that there's a grocery problem that has to do with power and pricing. And to me, that is so exciting and so essential. Well, there's been a lot of attention on the city-owned grocery stores. I think there's been less attention on the deep politics behind it, which is that the campaign was already coming with 2 things, 2 really critical things. And when I talked to Zohran about his campaign a couple months ago, one of the things he really emphasized is, one, it is the most connected campaign to small businesses that we've seen in New York City ever, as far as I can tell. I'm sure there's a deeper history, but certainly since in the last 20 years, and I think much longer. And I mean connected on the ground, listening, actually hearing about small businesses' real challenges. And that just changes everything, because most politicians don't have any connection to small businesses except as like an archetype they pop up, not somebody they're listening.
Maureen Tkachuk, who writes for us and who works at Matt's group, has termed this phrase for Zohran as a small business socialist.
Yeah.
And like, if you look at that Halal Cart video that got very popular, it is all about the struggles of small business that reflect in the price you pay for lamb over rice and chicken over rice.
Absolutely.
And that if we made it easier for small businesses to operate, then your rice and lamb would be cheaper. Like, it's an incredible fusion of the number one problem, which is affordability, and the problems facing small businesses. Really,
and in terms of where he comes from, I actually first met him around democracy reform in New York, which we desperately need. Actual procedural reform in the New York State Assembly. But the next few times I encountered him, one was working with taxi drivers, so very much on the ground and dealing with the issues of debt, the rules governing taxi drivers, how Uber was impacting their margins, all of that. And the second was that he was a major critic of the mayor's focus on going after halal carts instead of big business in using the Consumer and Worker Protection Bureau. So, like, there all these different pieces show that deep connection that comes from both his own personal experience as an assembly member, but also the campaign being deeply tied to the small businesses around the city.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a kind of question about New York politics, because that halal video, right? What he basically said is, to run a halal cart in New York, you have to pay someone who already has a license for it. You have to pay them like $20,000 a year or something. Is instead of just applying for a license, because the city is so incompetent, they just don't give out licenses. Like, it takes you 10 years to get a license. And it's like, there's like problems like that everywhere. So I have a friend who had a kid who's disability or something, and like, he was trying to get some services from New York, and they have pretty good services in New York, but it's like, to get them, you have to sue. And so there's 100,000 lawsuits for everyone who has a disabled kid.
Yeah, this is, unfortunately, for people who don't know this is the process in New York. What Matt's talking about is well known as the process in New York to deal with getting services for your kid, is to sue.
It's like, but I'm guessing that there's just like a ton of stuff that's just like that. It's like, we used to have this joke, and I worked in Congress, which is like, we would identify a problem that obviously no one was going to fix, and a guy started saying, one of my colleagues started saying, yeah, someone should really do something about that. And it was just like the joke, because of course nobody would.
Yeah.
It feels like there's probably a lot of things in New York like that. And something very weird about being on the left is that, or like in American politics, like doing stuff about anything and being left wing became kind of conflated, right? Like, it's like being moderate means not doing anything, or being centrist means not doing anything. And if you want to like do something about anything, they're like, oh, that radical activist. And I guess
Oh,
I wonder, is that a framework? That was my impression. Is that like, is that like uh, is that what's really going on here? Or is there really an ideological, like, I mean, obviously it's an ideological distinction, but is it like there's people that are like, yeah, let's just keep things spinning. And then this Mandami is really coming in saying, no, I'm actually going to do stuff, but that's being interpreted as this radical left wing thing.
yeah. God, look, I don't know. Like, we're
Okay.
gonna have a lot of, and I hope we do spend a lot more time actually trying to figure out what happened and not, just punditry on how difficult this is going to be
Yeah,
for
that was a stupid
Democrats, which
question. It was really
no,
just
no,
me
no,
trying to get my
no,
my view in
but
there. I just like wanted to point out
okay.
that the
So
city is kind of
maybe
a mess, and just
so
having somebody who can like manage.
absolute revolution. This is an enormous deal. That the not just that he won, Andrew conceded, but that he won with higher turnout. The assumption was low turnout is going to be better for for the outsider candidate. That looks like hundreds of thousands of new voters, or at least over 100,000 new voters. We'll find out the exact number. That's a big deal, huge generational change, and something I think both of you guys have talked about is one of the challenges for the Democratic Party has been that primary voters seem to be kind of happy with the status quo. The primary voters were not happy with the status quo at all.
Right.
And that's a huge deal. And I do think that status quo, that's certainly, uh, you know, even though Cuomo had been kicked out, he's just clearly part of the old machine and the old way of doing things. So that's
Yeah.
exciting to me. And so I do think that I was talking to some people at the party last night about like, what does socialism mean? I think for a lot of people, socialism means something different is going to happen. You're good. And something different in a way that is infused with like care of other people, real compassion about other people, a real
Right.
sense of responsibility. After that, there may be a wide variety of interpretations, but that desire for something different, the same way in which people were attacking him for being a socialist, I think for a lot of people, they're like, I need some sign that you are just not part of the old club.
And there's also this sort of fusion, and maybe I'm overreading this, but I think maybe it had something to do with ranked choice voting. The role of Brad Lander and this cross endorsement, and which, as far as I know, is going to lead to some sort of deputy mayorship. In that's the reporting that we've done,
Mhm.
that was kind of part of baked into this whole situation. You know, uh, there are these sort of two theories on the left. One is that you have to give people something to believe in. Maybe that's the sort of popularism idea, but I think it's just more like you have to actually say that you're going to fix stuff and and
And it
and
has to be credible,
and
like,
campaign in a credible way. And then there's the sort of, well, what you have to do is you have to get things done when you have the opportunity. And
yeah,
then when you have the opportunity, you have to govern well. And that's
yeah.
the deliverism idea that sort of Matt and I have worked on. And it seems like there's a fusion here where Mamdani is really great at communicating and great at grounding these ideas in what people actually want. And then Lander has all of this experience dealing with the bureaucracy in New York City and can operationalize a lot of these great ideas. And it just seems like a marriage that we could have had 10 years ago, frankly, with factions on the left. And we didn't for various reasons, and things got really messy. And now there's an opportunity to, have this one-two punch again and really deliver something rather than just talk about it.
I think that's true, and I also want to tweak it a little bit.
Please.
So, right, two things. One is I would not underestimate Mamdani's ability to attract extraordinary, dedicated talent. And sometimes I don't want to mean talent like the smartest guys in the room. I mean people who
Right.
are really dedicated to actually figuring out how to fix the halal cart problem and how to fix
Right.
significant problems in the DOE, in the Department
Hmm.
of Education. Like
Hmm.
that, I think you are going to see an influx of talent. And his existing policy team, yes, he's had 4 or 5 years in the assembly. Frankly, that's more experience than I had when I ran for governor against Andrew Cuomo. So, no, but look, it's not nothing. And on the other hand, although Brad Lander's campaign wasn't going to win, the communicating that Brad has done in the last 2 weeks was some of the most powerful and moving and unexpected communication that I have seen, and that he was able not just to communicate about his experience. So I just want to say,
I'm not trying to say he's a schlub.
Let me ask a practical question, okay? Because I think the big knock on Mamdani is experience, right? And
it's so hard to know, though, Matt. It's like, was it actually experience, or was it
scary?
Whatever. Okay, fine.
Yeah. Okay. But okay, you want to talk about the experience part? Let's talk about the experience.
Well, I want to talk about something slightly different, which is the grocery store thing, right?
Yeah.
So now he's got to set up 5 grocery stores. All right. Who's going to do that? Like, how's that going to happen? Like, you got to set up a grocery store, right? That's not like, does he hire?
It's not a foreign concept. There's a small town in Kansas that does this.
No, I get it. I'm not saying it's rocket science, but I'm just like, this guy doesn't have a big track record of doing stuff, right? I'm not saying that you need one.
Right.
I'm just being like, what's he going to do? Has he talked to people in the grocery distribution business? Does he have his grocery guys ready to go? Is he gonna, like, how's it going to work?
So, since I have not recently been running for mayor, and no, I say that lightly, but I actually want to say it seriously, Matt. Yeah.
Can I give you some context? So I talked to somebody in the industry today who's well-placed, who was like, I was like, hey, one of the cool things that they could do is if they set these grocery stores up, they could like make their prices transparent, wholesale, New York could sue over Robinson Patman. There's all sorts of cool stuff. And he said, yeah, independent grocers like hate this idea. They just hate the idea. And I'm like, there's a political problem here. It's solvable. It's not that it's impossible, but like there's a political problem. So what's he going to do?
Yeah. And the truth is, I actually do believe that he would have an answer. And I'm not saying it would be an answer that would satisfy you, but I don't. And I haven't heard him address that particular question, but I have not been one of those Zohran Mamdani boyfriends who watches every Zohran Mamdani.
What's your expectation? Like, if you had to like predict it or whatever, I mean, he hires a Zephyr Teachout, says you're in charge of the grocery thing, which I don't think is unreasonable. But like, what would you expect him to sort of do? How do you make that happen?
Well, I'm going to keep resisting this a little, Matt, because I actually think it's a serious enough question that I don't want to on the fly answer. Like, which agencies do you use?
Right.
How do you deal with the particular real estate questions? There's a few questions that are answered all the time, though, which is to David's point, which is like engaging in using real estate in New York City for New York City projects. That's not new. Figuring out some of the other infrastructure parts of that's not new. The thing that is new is the particular project here. So I'm really resisting answering it, Matt. But I think these are
not going to be the mayor.
Right,
it's fine.
It's fine. Or help the mayor.
But I want to emphasize the thing you didn't say, or the thing you didn't dwell on, which is that you pointed out. The city-run grocery stores can actually then help do this other job. Because one of the things I think Mamdani's campaign about is democracy, right? And a huge part of democracy that we learned from the Grangers in the 19th century is actual serious public education about the structures in our economy. That's something that Lena Khan did an incredible job with. Right. And that we actually need to do that. And we need to do that in all kinds of ways. And just setting up a public grocery store and talking about the challenges of getting that great farm produce from the Hudson Valley into the city, and what the contracts are in other grocery stores that are limiting that is in itself going to be a political act that can help then transform not just those 4 grocery stores. Because to me, that's not the point. The point is,
I agree with you. I I don't think the operational challenges are it, although, that's kind of what tripped up Brandon Johnson, and we don't want to see that again. I think you can get good
Brendan
people
Johnson's the
and you
mayor
can
of
figure
Chicago. He's like
mayor of
widely
Chicago.
disliked. He's
But
left
but
wing.
there are but
Yeah.
there are certainly examples of this. Like I said, there's a small public grocery store in Kansas. There's free buses in Kansas City. A lot of the things that he did, there are actually, examples in red states. I think that the operational challenges for Mamdani are the people on the call for the Zohran situation, the
Right.
idea of a capital strike, and not even just that, but also, the Trump administration and what they are fixing to do is going to put enormous pressure on state budgets, and that filters down into
Huge,
municipal
huge.
budgets. And,
And Hochul
that's
gave
the
him a
real
nice
challenge.
Hochul gave him a nice note of congratulations, but when you have federal pressure on the state budget, it's going
Right.
to be it's a very
Especially
significant.
because in New York City, the mayor is a little bit weak because it really needs the governor to buy in to some of those ideas in order for him to get, like with taxes, for example.
Yeah, I think the stuff that is going to be exciting and different and not as challenging, although new, is the non-competes, other possible, bans on personalized pricing at a city level.
Yeah,
There's a lot of the
yeah,
stuff that has a price tag attached, where the negotiation with the state is going to be extremely difficult,
right.
and is going to rely on what you were talking about earlier, David, which is that him using his really quite considerable communication skills
Yeah.
against a
He's going to
fairly
have to keep people engaged.
hostile media, frankly,
And a
to
hostile
build
element on
political.
Wall Street. He's going to have to keep people engaged. I think that's the bottom
Yeah,
line.
yeah,
This was a
because
great discussion. We are kind of
Wait,
out of time,
can I
but
ask one last question?
all right, yeah,
Zephyr,
real
are you
quick.
going to go work for the new administration if he wins the mayorship?
I would probably go. I'm really excited about it. So, so you
You
can
heard it
tell
here
Zoran.
first.
Yes.
Future mayor ex officio, Zephyr Teachout. Thanks for coming on short notice. Obviously, this was a political earthquake, so it was great to have you here.
Great to see you guys. Bye bye.
All right, thanks a lot.
So, question for you,
Mhm.
Dave. Do you think that this is just like a one-off, or is this like a populist party realignment in the Democratic Party?
I mean, I'm tempted not to, uh, uh, extrapolate from a very unique situation, a mayor's race in New York City, a municipal race that is in a very idiosyncratic city. But at the same time, I really want to, because if you really look, I mean, if you look at Zoran up against who the leaders of America are right now as it stands today, there's just no comparison. I mean, he just makes everybody look old and worn out, and he has this kind of freshness to him that really speaks to a new era of politics. And maybe I'm overselling it, but I don't think I am, because one of the big things I think of commonality here that is something you can take across the country is Democrats hate their own leaders. They want them thrown out. And the real fault line here, it's less ideological than, are you going to stand up and fight for me at all? Or are you going to lay down like we feel you have for a long time? And that part of the victory seems very much like something you can take across the country.
Yeah, I think that's right. I guess I would analogize it to, I think, two elections. Well, first of all, it's funny. You mentioned in when we were talking to Zephyr,
Mhm.
you were like, there's a meeting of real estate magnates
Right.
and Wall Street guys about the Zoran situation.
Bizarre.
And I just want to make it clear to listeners, that was not a joke.
No,
That
that's
is
real.
actually happening.
It was
So I just want to,
happening at 2 o'clock the day
yeah.
after the election.
And apparently, I think they are swinging behind Eric Adams, right, for the general. So Eric
Right.
Adams is going to have like a massive super
This,
PAC. But
yeah.
I think, it's like one thing we didn't talk about is like, Michael Bloomberg gave a lot of money, millions of dollars, but so did Airbnb, so did like the investors in Palantir, like a huge number. There was a lot of landlords, a lot of people came all in against Zoran. And I think it's like pretty meaningful that he got wildly outspent and won. And I think
Yeah.
that this to me is a little bit like the two elections that I've experienced. Like one of them was the Lieberman-Lamont election in 2006.
Right.
right?
Just for younger people, in 2006, Joe Lieberman was a senator from Connecticut. Ned Lamont was like this guy we found,
Yeah,
basically.
he was like a
Uh,
wealthy guy in Connecticut, and he ran against Lieberman and won narrowly in the primary, and then lost in the general. The reason it mattered, though, isn't because it was a particularly interesting election. It's because that was the moment when everyone in the Democratic Party, during the height of the anti-Bush mania, was like, all right, which part of the party is going to dominate? And when Lieberman, who is the status quo guy,
Very pro-war
won that
guy
election.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very pro, and actually the mentor in the Senate of Obama. When
Right.
he won, it was the signal to everyone in the Democratic establishment: the populists have lost, the neoliberals have won. And when Lieberman went back into the Senate chamber with the Democrats, they
He
gave
got
him a
a
standing
standing
ovation.
ovation.
And so like
Yeah.
that was, and then in
Yeah.
2008, Obama won, but he ran against Hillary, he ran against John Edwards, and all of them were essentially like status quo people. And like we stayed status quo really until, until AOC, until just, Bernie 2016 was like, but like this
Right.
architecture stayed pretty static until now. The other election, I think, was the Eric Cantor, David Brad election in 2014. These are minor elections, but they are kind of like system defining
Right.
ones, where in 2014, Eric Cantor was like, he's a Republican leader in the House, going to win re-election
He was number
automatically.
two. He was the number two guy. He was the number two guy in the
Yeah,
House.
he was going to
So
be
he was a
the
big deal
speaker.
in the House.
Yeah.
Right.
And then he just like randomly lost to this guy in a
He
primary
was a
named David
libertarian
Brad.
law professor. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was just like, wait, what? And everyone was like, wait, what? And it was like a random race in Virginia. But then it showed that there was anger in the Republican base among Republican voters. It wasn't a one-off. And then the next year, Donald Trump gets into the primary, and it turns out that all Republican base voters, or enough of them, are Brat voters. They were people that were angry, and Trump then wins the primary. So I think this is like one of those elections. It's a
So
system-defining
you're
election.
saying there's two paths, right? There's the path of, the Lamont race, which was very grassroots oriented, but then getting beat because mainly because the party didn't have his back, even though he was the Democratic nominee, and then Lieberman comes in, they circle the wagons, the establishment, or a Brat versus Cantor race where the establishment has no ability to circle the wagons because it's just too big, the repressed anger that happens. So there's like two paths there.
That's one way to put it. I actually think it's something slightly different. So I just think in 2006, the base voters, the party-based voters in the Democratic Party preferred the status quo. I think maybe 40% of them wanted some sort of change, but 60% of them didn't, right? And enough of them. So like when they saw, because if it had just been the party establishment rallies, you would have seen other places where they didn't rally, but it's not like that. Everybody who challenged the status quo lost for the next 15 years.
Well,
So I think
that is true, but I think that was the defining one.
Well, that was the defining, but it sort of doesn't matter. But I just think
Yeah.
that like the polling shows that Democrats are happy with their leaders until recently. Now I think what you're seeing
Now the
is
polling
like
shows they're extremely
they're not
unhappy.
happy, and they voted on it. And I think that's
Right.
like it's a big deal that the New York Times basically ran an anti-endorsement of Mamdani, and the party didn't care.
And
like
by the way,
that's insane.
That endorsement, I was in New York over the weekend. Every single ad foregrounded that New York Times endorsement, a de facto endorsement of Cuomo and an anti-endorsement of Mamdani.
Right. And so to have the New York Times is like, it is the master of the salad fork, and Democrats care about the salad fork.
It's the Democratic Bible.
Yeah.
And
And so to have them ignore the New York Times and ignore all of this money I think is transformational. I think it's going to happen across the country. If I'm a politician right now, I'm looking at this and I'm going to see, are people in New York that different than they are anywhere else? And I just don't think they are.
Well, this is why we did the emergency pod. We think it's a really important
If I'm a big company,
development.
I am in the next 10 years, like it is, there is a different populist framework coming to this country. We saw it with Donald Trump. Now we're going to see it with the Democrats.
There we go.
All
right. We're going to be back next week with even more organized money.
Organized money.